season continues with chaos on Coruscant. Chemical bombs fell over the city, and rebels were forced to react in a multitude of ways. Dural may have gotten the Sith Emperor away from the system, but his stench was still embracing the planet. The guerrilla freedom fighters rushed back from their initial location. Sith bombers sped through the air and released their bombs. Dural knew that the enemy would grow tired of them, so he prepared anti-chemical weaponry. The only question was whether or not it would work. Thanks in part to the ecumenopolis that was Coruscant before the war, there were weather systems in place around the planet to regulate temperature and rainfall. A big reason for this was due to the height of the city. The only shown location of the planet's actual surface was Mount Umate in the former plaza. As a result, the people of Coruscant over the centuries added weather control devices to make sure the temperature was both breathable and hospitable to the population of over 2 trillion. Now that the war had been going on for well over a year, the rebels in Dural had equipped these weather devices with mounts that could, in theory, protect them from the elements and from poison. The Sith never liked playing by the rules of combat, so when the bombs dropped following Dural's surprise attack against the Empire, he and his warriors rushed back towards the portals. Inside, Hovercraft pulled out the massive machines that regulated Coruscant's atmosphere. His captains quickly flipped the switches as the chemical detonators floated down from the sky, and with the ignition of the machines, the weather system changed. Air currents redirected the bombs away from the populated portions of the city towards the industrial sector. Of course, there would be those infected by the various diseases inside the bombs. The first type to hit the ground was a regular chemical explosion. It shot out a spray of gas that would gag any grown adult in less than a minute and kill them. Intention was a quick and easy death with that bomb. The second and previously mentioned bomb was a hallucinogenic that turned people into self-destructive animals. It was a curse if it captured you with its rancid smell. Those that ended up in range of this specific type of bomb ended up turning on friends and family, killing them in fits of uncontrollable rage. Though thanks to Dural and his team of engineers in the underworld, they were able to make sure any casualties across the city were at a minimum. As the weather system booted up and deflected most of these attacks with air currents, the rebels realized that the Sith were fully gone from the system. Lord Valkorn had only given the orders to bomb the planet, and once their bays were empty, and returned to the main fleet just outside of Alderaan at Kamaz. The rebels of Coruscant would remain on edge, but the first thing they did without the Sith present was get into contact with other bands of survivors around the planet. The major metropolises around the city had been hit hard. These survivors under Dural's command may have called the former Senate district and financial areas home, but the ecumenopolis spanned the entire planet. There were billions of stories, lives, and survivors still living and potentially even thriving in their own ways. Dural may have only been a military man, but he was able to unite the fighters on this side of the planet. It was time to see if he could bring Coruscant together to stand up against the oppression of the Sith. Though it must be said, just because the Sith fleet departed from the planet, it did not mean that the rebels believed they were safe. It was just an assurance. They could not communicate with one another yet. Dural believed that the Emperor would grow wary of continuing the fight here. Too many resources for practically nothing. Whether or not he would come back remained unknown, but today, for the next several hours following the cleanup of the bombings, there would be room for celebration. In that excitement, Dural, amongst his advisors and allies, would start working on a plan to be able to aid the rest of the Republic, but their contributions were already making a huge difference. Valkorn's new station on Kamaz forced a reaction from the Confederacy, especially Cthulhu. The super tactical droid had already positioned the attack fleet into a defense fleet. Once they picked up on the movement from the adjacent system, they moved the Lucrehulks and Star Destroyers back into formation so that they could be prepared in case of a counterattack. On the surface of Alderaan, Bola Rapal, hundreds of clones and the Jedi Knight would work together to take care of the survivors. Alderaan had once again proven its resilience, but that was also in part thanks to the widowed queen, Breha Organa. As Master Rapal was learning throughout his time on the planet, the Alderaanians were fostering secret bands of rebels inside the forests. These were approved by Breha, and she distributed the royal guard to help train these guerrillas. Unlike with Mon Cala or Onderon, the Sith rarely went to the surface of Alderaan. That was especially enforced by Darth Bane whenever he took over this post. He didn't see any value from the people of Alderaan, aside from slave labor, but the Empire already had more than enough of that. As a result, most of these rebels were simply training for a battle that never came. Though the Jedi General informed them of what the Mon Calamari were trying to plan with their planetary coalition, it put fire back into the hearts of the rebels that never saw their day in action. Regardless of what Bolo was trying to do on the surface, General Cthulhu had a much more important job: oversight of forward command. Admiral Trench had gotten reports from Republic High Command about movements inside the Sith lines. The mass mobilization had him moving to more defendable locations across CIS territory. He understood that he had to be close to a hyperspace lane and 2 locations of interest for the Sith. The Void was also making moves in the Outer Rim, but the reinforcements from Geonosis and Hypori had already mounted up for their own counters if the time presented itself. The Admiral and leader of the Confederacy was also in close communication with Cthulhu, which is why he knew exactly what was coming through Fondor. Just as the Republic was doing before Cthulhu's arrival, during the battle with Zala's fleet, the Aligned force was mobilizing. Counters were readying themselves for pushes into the core. Everyone present on both sides knew how important this moment was. Everything had been building towards a series of wins or losses. Among the fleets over Fondor was Mace Windu. He had continued bouncing between systems. Right now, he was with a completely different fleet again. His previous one had him hitting targets in the Outer Rim. Now he was with a front-of-the-line fleet, 5 Star Destroyers, several Venators, and plenty of support ships. He stood at the helm of the ship, with the officers on deck, and watched the other, several fleets, entering orbit and preparing their hyperdrives for the next jump. Fondor was becoming a necessary route for everyone preparing to engage in battle. As Windu was getting ready to give the deckhands their orders, the bridge was buzzed by Skywalker's shuttle. Mace pursed his lips with a half grin, telling Anakin and those with them that the Force was with them. The crew gave a similar response back to Mace, and departed into hyperspace towards Alderaan. Another detachment of Republic Venators followed them. At that, the command was given, and Master Windu made his move for Hosnian Prime. Inside Anakin's shuttle, the 3 Jedi sat with concentration. Revan was a little rusty at it, but he was walking everyone through a battle meditation. Skywalker was calmer than ever before. Similar to the lead-up of the Battle of Coruscant, he was hyper-focused. Everyone inside the ship was focused. It wasn't lost on Anakin what had happened the last time he prepared for something like this. It would be his and Ahsoka's first mission with a large battle group since he landed on Dathomir, almost half a year before. Skywalker listened to Revan as he spoke methodically, connecting the 2 other Jedi to himself. He knew that the most effective approach to battle meditation was connection. Perhaps there were different forms, but he was going off of what little he knew. Ahsoka and Anakin already had a strong connection, but maximum efficiency was needed for this. Skywalker told Revan before they left Tir na Nog that he was worried about Ahsoka. They both knew what happened last time on Coruscant. They were going into the belly of the beast again. Everyone had to operate at their most efficient level. Revan asked if either of them had anything to say. Master and apprentice turned to one another and thought for a moment, before shaking their heads. There wasn't anything that they needed to say that wasn't already known, so Revan took the moment to say what he believed should be said. He thanked them for their embrace of him. He hoped that their friend Zala could find the same path home to the light. He reinforced the importance of their mission, and he promised them both that he would do anything he could to protect them. Taking down Valkorin would not be easy. It would take everything they had. The 2 younger Jedi nodded. Revan took a moment to smile, and R2 added a few beeps in to fill the space. While the Aligned forces were mobilizing, many of them jumping into hyperspace for their own battles and campaigns, the Sith were the ones to strike first. The massive fleet under the leadership of Tulak Horde, Valen, and Nihilus deployed over the planet Darknell. It was a Republic defense world, with mines protecting the perimeter of the system, Golan platforms, and a standby fleet, which immediately called for backup. The hulking Sith force deployed fighters and wiped out the hyperspace mines immediately. It was a quick and decisive strike. From the bridge of the flagship, the Sith Lord in command directed his forces outwards. While Nihilus remained silent inside of his own vessel, Valen joined Tulak Horde to watch his work. Similar to her brother Arcan, she believed it'd be more important to learn on the job. She might have had her own array of failures to learn from, but losing a massive invasion force like this wasn't something she planned on surrendering. Lord Tulak wanted to win the battle over Darknell as quickly as possible. If he didn't, it could allow for a countering Republic fleet to make its way to Iridu, or even worse, one of the separatist battle groups. Tulak wasn't concerned with either faction in general, but because the Republic held their high command base at Iridu, he knew how difficult it'd be to take anyways. There was no need to make that battle any more challenging than it needed to be by allowing the aligned coalition to send reinforcements to protect the massive station before they ever arrived. Just as quickly as they exited hyperspace over Darknell, the battle began. The starfighters dispatched by the Sith were almost immediately intercepted. Their main targets had been the space mines, so some of the Sith pilots kamikazed into the mines to detonate more Republic fighters and clear the path. Everyone who fought with Tulak understood the importance of their role. This was the battle for the war. If they could destroy Iridu space station, killing off all of Republic High Command staff, then they could easily open the gateway into Republic territory. Also, there was hope that the other potential invasions could aid them across the battle line against the Republic, the CIS, and any other aligned force. Neither Sith flinched inside the command vessel, as it drifted closer to the minefield, where detonations still rang out, killing entire batches of fighters from both sides. Tulak turned back and nodded to the commander of the vessel. The flagship slowed its movement, and a beam readied from the center of the hull. An orangish-yellow light emitted from the wings of the battleship, and sped towards the center of the bow. Once it reached the tip, it blasted out a fiery ray that eviscerated everything in its path. Sith and clone pilots were killed in moments, before the beam collided with the edge of the first Golan platform. Valen leaned forward to examine the damage, and she didn't see anything notable. Tulak raised his finger and smiled. The ray stopped firing and the flagship continued forward, with the rest of the fleet already surrounding it and making a push through the minefield. Some of the ships would be hit, but none of the damage would be substantial enough to destroy any of the vessels. Instead, everything would fire at the Golans. The Republic fleet in the area would move to protect the first platform, but there was a problem. While yes, Tulak had been successful during the war, his name had been kept quiet from the Republic, his troops relegated to training exercises until he believed the time was right. Maybe it was ignorant, but Lord Horde had an idea and brought it to life. The cannon strapped to his capital ship wasn't a super laser. The beam may have destroyed the common fighter instantly, but against a space station, Golan platform, or Star Destroyer, it could do a fleet's worth of damage in minutes. His time away from battle was spent on creating the perfect super weapon. Darth Sidious's dream of a Death Star or Eclipse could never be born, but the theory of strapping something powerful onto a flagship was a generational goal for the ancient Sith. Tulak's weapon was what he called cosmic rust. By using engineers, Sith alchemy, and a destroyed civilization in the unknown regions, he created a beam that could cut through shields. As Valen watched now, the damage was not instant, but over the course of several minutes it would break through the hull of anything. Didn't matter if it was a tank, starship, or building. The cosmic rust broke past shields due to the material it was coated in, and sped across the structure of whatever it hit. The Golan platform, which continued to pour turbo cannon fire into the ranks of the Sith fleet, slowly broke apart. Cosmic rust was a one-and-done type of blast. Eventually, whatever it hit would fall apart. Slowly, the Golan's weapons malfunctioned. Corridors opened up into the battle, sending officers and clones to their icy depths, and small isolated detonations filled the platform. Valen and Tulak watched the destruction. The Sith Lord was so beyond proud of his creation. She turned and asked if there was a cure to it, and he nodded, his hand raised, pointing towards the corridor outside the main command room. When her eyes found it, she saw a massive container with a silver-like material, and she nodded her head with a smile. Brilliant. He quickly explained that it worked like a secondary shielding. If he accidentally hit one of their vessels, the ship could flip turbo lasers on to fire at it, and they would coat anything with the protective material that would instantly stop cosmic rust. The cure to cosmic rust was a lot more simplistic than the actual weapon. He turned back to the front of the ship and snapped his finger. At that noise, a third of all vessels in the dogfight turned to face the Republic fleet. The vessels were rolling around the rusting Golan platform, though some of those ships were already facing the side effects of being near the rust. Due to the explosions and some of the debris making contact with the hull of a Venator or support ship, their vessels experienced similar, much slower fates to the Golan platform. Valen again questioned how they would avoid it, and he smiled. Just be a good pilot. The fleet wouldn't dare going near the cosmic rust. It was integral to their strategy to do so, but the fighters, they had to be in control. He had already explained an incident or two where a ship entered the hangar bay with some cosmic rust on it, forcing the ship to undergo maintenance repairs immediately. The deal was, if a ship had cosmic rust, they had two options: find a safe place to land, not inside of a Sith vessel, or die. Tulok pointed again to the captain and the flagship slowed its movement, tilting ever so slightly and loading up the beam again. Instead of targeting the Republic fleet, which would endanger the fighter attack sent in, they were attacking another Golan platform. The ray launched again, smashing into the side of the hull and starting the entire rusting process once more. The Sith dogfight took another positive turn, with the clones dying off. Nearby Sith support ships and corvettes were ripping through the Republic interceptors, giving the Dark Warriors the upper hand. As the second Golan platform experienced the same malfunctions as the first, the Sith fleet encircled the Republic. The villainous attack group was much more prepared for this engagement, and it showed with the mass amount of firepower and how they directed it. Like many other Republic defense worlds on the edge of their territory, Darknell's largest defense ship was a Venator. The Golan platforms were meant to be the anchor for the defense, but no one knew of the cosmic rust weapon, and as a result, the system fell. Within 40 minutes of the Sith arrival, the Republic fleet was nothing but debris, floating around the atmosphere, and the Sith then departed for the Republic capital of Iridu. As for the people on the surface of Darknell, they would deal with the ramifications of cosmic rust, falling to the surface of their planet. Soon, entire buildings would fall apart, and innocents unaffected by the battle would then be killed. At the northeast of the galactic map, Admiral Coburn made a stunning move by requesting for Depa Billaba to aid him in a trap. Due to the minor confrontations he'd had with Darth Malgus, the Republic Admiral, accompanied by Commander Cody, and their experience with the Skywalker Morden team, were making a daring move. Thanks to General Akbar, this entire move was possible. With the Mon Calamari receiving small support from a collection of planets within Separatist and Republic territory, he was able to send a portion of his fleet back to Mon Cala. The group assigned to Captain Raddus wouldn't go to Mon Calamari, though they would be redirected to the front lines of the Republic defense at Tufa, which had already been under General Billaba's control. This fleet exchange, though, provided the Republic the opportunity to re-enter the offensive, which only aided the DSC's interest in building a planetary coalition across the galaxy. If they could gather the free systems of the galaxy into fighting against the Sith, then the clones and Jedi could finish their jobs without worrying about the people. With the Mon Cala battle group under Captain Raddus's command at Tufa, Depa Billaba departed west, past Bodajev and Mandalore. Admiral Coburn's battle group had been popping systems around Ithor space. One engagement at Beheda had his and Malgus's fleet briefly engaged, before delaying their final battle by both retreating. The only reason Malgus fell back was to lead the Republic fleet into a trap. Coburn, throughout the past nearly 4 months, had been receiving fresh troops and new battleships, so while his fleet was crushing through the Sith wherever they landed, minor Republic fleets were doing cleanup work on minor defense worlds for the Sith. Malgus wanted to lure Coburn to Ord Mantell, where he'd be aided by another Sith fleet, which had by at this point been removed from the location to assist Lord Kresh with his offensive into Republic territory. This is how Admiral Coburn planned on trapping him. While yes, they'd be abandoning the route leading to Mon Calamari, Captain Raddus's deployment should be enough to stop anything in that area of the galaxy if it did go toward Mon Cala. Coburn assumed that Malgus was still stationed over Ord Mantell, and because the Republic didn't know about the secret shipyard at Numidian Prime, they'd be going around it to blindside the terrifying Sith warrior. Depa's fleet left from Tufa, speeding through hyperspace to greet Malgus head-on. while Coburn's fleet quietly knocked off a small defense force at Usri, just west of Ithor. This aggressive assault, like many of the campaigns in this movement at the moment, could decide not only the fate of the two most dominant fleets for either faction, but the fight for the northern hemisphere of the galactic map. Coburn had been trying to press further north, so he could isolate the corporate sector and bank west towards Megiddo and Mulinist, but Malgus solely stood in the way. The Republic and Coburn especially couldn't afford to stretch supply lines that thinly if someone as brutal as Malgus continued to protect that area of space. Elsewhere, word from Darknell returned to both Iridu and the rest of Republic lines, but a problem was already brewing on the other side of Republic territory. While the defenses at Sullust would be primed for an assault if the Sith Empire didn't go to Iridu, Kamino and Dressel had their own respective problems. Thanks to the promises of Valkorn, Jabba dispatched his largest attack group yet to bring the hammer down on Kamino. Quinlan Voss's assumption that the Sith would attack Gamorre had been wrong, but his misplaced belief would also give him and the Separatists the chance to make a counterattack. So with Jabba's Void group making its move on Kamino and Shaak Ti preparing the defenses for one of the most important worlds in Republic territory, 3 key Void worlds fell under attack. Tatooine by a group assisted by Poggle the Lesser, Circumdor by Quinlan Voss, and the fortress world of Obadiah by Admiral Akbar. It all started with Tatooine. A Separatist battle group moved into Void airspace, and the fleets engaged. Poggle's fleet was filled with Trade Federation battleships and deployed thousands of starfighters. Even though Jabba no longer called Tatooine home, the planetary defenses were still primed. Outside the planet's atmosphere, light cruisers and destroyers traded blows with a band of Separatist frigates. Hyena bombers trailed behind wings of Tri-Fighters and Vulture droids as they deployed over the sands of Tatooine. The 3 major cities had minor air raids, but most importantly, the Hutt defense towers, which were nothing compared to the turbo cannons used by the major factions, crumbled. The Hyena bombers moved through every single defense with ease, and only a few vessels were shot out of the sky. To intensify the assault, Poggle deployed HMP gunships with B-2 battle droids to the surface. There were some dogfights in the skies, but they lasted very briefly. The HMPs were untouched as they landed, releasing the B-2s. Once the super battle droids started moving against the ground defenses, the HMPs lifted off into the air and provided support from above. Their missiles were too much for anything on the ground to handle. As it had been throughout the war against the Void, several street soldiers realized their foolishness. Due to how the Void operated, with almost all of its military being controlled by former civilians, their morale was very easily crushed. The Hutts especially kept battle statistics and losses away from the public eye, so no one knew that the Void had actively been losing battles across their territory. Once it became clear that Jabba and his goons had lied to them, the people of the local population surrendered, though Poggle, with direct orders from Admiral Trench, executed those who fought for the Void. It was the protocol of the Confederacy. Anyone who served with the Void was an enemy of the state. They could lay their weapons down before battle started and they would live. But once their defeat became an imminent fate during battle, they had lost their chance to surrender. The Republic didn't know about this, and on joint assaults, these orders would not be followed. Across the Outer Rim, over the planet of Obadiah, General Akbar arrived at a hyperspace with his Mon Calamari fleet. There were some Mandalorian Cormac starfighters that accompanied them into battle. Unlike Tatooine, where the defense force in orbit was weak, Obadiah was prepared for this battle. The planet had a refinery for Rhydonium, and frequently traded it to other systems within the Void. The Pikes, while being a key part to the structure of the combined criminal syndicate, made a deal as beneficial as they could for themselves. Their defense fleet was filled with layers of vessels. For the Mon Cala, this was their largest challenge yet, but Commander Akbar helmed the fleet. This was his operation, and he was tired of being besieged by these villainous coalitions. The Mon Cala cruisers may have not been created with the intention to wage battle, but they were shielded better than anything in any military. So even though Akbar deployed with such a small fleet, he readied the forward shields. Thanks to Duchess Satine, he was accompanied by pilots from Mandalore led by Princess Bo-Katan. Per Akbar's orders, the Mandalorian fighters kept close to the main fleet. The cruisers launched their long-range cannons and cracked away slowly at the Obadiah defense fleet. The pirate vessels prepared the defenses, but their defense was unlike the offense taking a stand over Kamino. Shaak Ti from the surface inside Tipoca City watched the holomap. The Void sent in hundreds of starships, and the Republic defense fired away. Due to the activity in the Outer Rim because of the Void, there were 3 Star Destroyers outside of Kamino, but they weren't tanking the main hits. What the Void didn't know was how detrimental their attack would become. Breaking through the initial defenses of the Republic fleet would be brutal, taking nearly 2 hours to do. With bounty hunters piloting their personal starfighters around Republic defense lines, the Void was able to capitalize off of a lack of clone pilots. Outside the atmosphere, starfighters were breaking apart. The talented warriors of the Void forced the Republic to rely on its cruisers, while rookies and shinies on the surface waited inside the cities for their first true taste of action. The bounty hunters may have provided an avenue for Void dropships to break through the defense fleet, but the warships in the Republic fleet cut the dropships down before they could even breach the atmosphere. Explosions continued to litter the air as bounty hunters, per their orders, sped towards Tipoca City. Instead of a defenseless city, the Kaminoans and Republic built turbo towers inside the ocean, ones that stood out of the water and immediately fired at the attacking bounty hunters. To the surprise of the Void aggressors, there were acclimators and acquaintances defending the airspace over Tipoca City. The bounty hunters avoided the turbo lasers mostly. Some of them were shot out of the sky and crashed down into the ocean. Just as the battles over Kamino and Obadiah were kicking off, General Skywalker arrived outside of Alderaan. A communication was sent to Cthulhu, who opened a transmission with the small crew. He informed the Jedi General of everything that had transpired. Despite their position on the front lines, the waves of war were changing. The super tactical droid quickly listed off some of the aforementioned battles and locations of certain fleets, like the Separatist battle group heading for Botor, which would mimic General Windu's assault at Hosnian Prime. Anakin listened to this information update as he flew the shuttle closer towards the rear end of the Joint Defense Fleet. They were preparing to jump into hyperspace for another assault on Sith territory. Valkoran's fleet just outside of Kamaz was their target. Anakin was going to rendezvous with the closest Star Destroyer and then depart with the fleet. The plan was simple, and he discussed with Cthulhu before they set their coordinates and jumped. This was an all-hollow communication discussion, but Cthulhu would provide the shuttle 3 attack groups: the interceptors to take the brunt, the fighters to assist them with the landing procedure, and the H&B gunships which would carry troops to assist them on the inside. The 3 Jedi loved everything about this idea because it was what they needed. The super battle droids and commandos assigned to the various gunships would provide relief to them as they made their assault. Cthulhu analyzed every single victory under Skywalker's belt, and came to the exact number of battle droids needed to successfully find victory without any sentient casualties. There were 15 more droids than the perfect count by his calculations to ensure total triumph. Anakin thanked the droid general before the communication ended. Revan then turned to the 2 of them and stated that the droids really were a benefit to the Republic. Ahsoka agreed, admitting that it was a little hard considering how this entire war started, but it was nice, just relieving. As the final word left her mouth, R2 beeped chaotically. The 3 of them turned to the astromech. The proximity alerts inside the vessel were buzzing to life. Instead of jumping into hyperspace to confront Valkoran's fleet, they were being forced into their own battle. From the viewport, they watched a massive Sith attack force exit from hyperspace. They didn't hold back either. While the aligned fleet wasn't prepared for battle, all shields and weapon stations were ready for combat because they were going to be in combat. Cthulhu was genuinely surprised, but at the helm of the flagship, he immediately gave out orders to the rest of the fleet. Everyone panicked. Ahsoka pulled on the control yoke, ripping the Republic shuttle to the side to avoid being pulverized by blaster fire from the Sith fleet. This sudden attack sent everyone into confusion and worry. As a result of this reaction, Anakin regained the controls and spun the ship over some rockets. It wasn't enough though. The wing was clipped by a shot and ripped to the left, losing around half of its mobility. As a result, the vessel buzzed out of control and slammed into an open hangar bay inside a Separatist cruiser. Across the stars, Republic High Command came under attack. Iridu, after hearing of Darknell's destruction, prepared an adequate defense fleet. Everything was lined up, and the hypervelocity cannon on the surface of the planet was ready to fire. Because almost every order for the military came out of Iridu, this planet was ready for an attack force. So when a singular vessel appeared out of hyperspace, just beyond the range of any weapons, they were confused. It was what appeared to be a battleship, but according to the crews of the space stations and Golan platforms, there wasn't anyone crewing it. The officers on deck kept their eyes on the vessel, and it didn't do anything. It just dropped out of hyperspace and stopped moving. The engines weren't even on. It seemed completely inoperable. This was not only very concerning, but slightly terrifying. They knew, to an extent, what just slashed through the tight protective grid over Darknell. Some wondered if it was a singular vessel that could do that much damage. Others believed that Sullust was actually the main target, but for 30 minutes the ghost ship sat untouched by the Republic, and it didn't move a single inch. V-19s patrolled just inside the firing range of the Golans and Star Destroyers, but they couldn't see anything. Their scanners couldn't pick up anything either. Unlike the previous defense, this planet was equipped with 10 Star Destroyers, one of the largest operations in the entire Republic. It was a border planet too, not just close to Sith territory, but right on top of Separatist systems too. Iridu was extremely vulnerable, and the Republic did everything they could to ensure its vulnerability was never capitalized on. Without the Separatists working against them, it was just the Sith now, and whatever phantom vessel sat just outside their defense perimeter. The thing is, even when starfighters got into firing range of the battleship, it didn't fire at them. And the truth is, it was simply a distraction, a vessel that held no real importance. Lord Horde's fleet was designed to come out of hyperspace just when the ghost ship seemed to be a non-threat to the Republic. So when the massive battle group dropped into the system at a completely different vector, the Republic fleet had to readjust all of their lines. It was dangerous traveling through hyperspace without using a proper hyperspace lane, but the Deshade assassins under the command of Kem Val had mapped out locations in free space that would mark safe jumping locations for their fleet. Now, the Sith fleet that exited over Iridu wasn't on the other side of the planet. They were still within firing range of the Golans, so that wasn't changed. It was merely the principle of illusion, confusion, then chaos. Tulak quietly watched the Republic fleet move into its attack positions, but not into attack range. Just beyond them, inside Nihilus's Ravager, the Lord of Hunger and Valen prepared their landing sequence. A vessel filled with the best warriors in this attack group, including the Deshade assassins, loaded into dropships and exited the Ravager the moment it left hyperspace from a further vector. Tulak did not plan to underestimate his enemy. While he could go around them and probably win, he preferred winning in a straight fight. The Golan platforms were deadly. These were Mark II platforms over Iridu, so even if they secured the planet without winning in space, they would technically lose. The main target was High Command. If they could knock out the space station, then they would effectively cripple Republic leadership. It was a necessary part to winning here, because Iridu, for the Sith, was no different than pretty much any other planet. The key to them was the command structure. While Valen and Nihilus were preparing their assault on the hypervelocity cannon on the surface of Iridu, Darth Malgus engaged with Depa Balaba's fleet over Ord Mantell. She was working with a much smaller battle group than her opponent, but she led Malgus directly into conflict. There weren't any space stations in this area. The idea was to build the illusion that the Sith weren't focused on the quadrant of the galaxy. Even though their shipyards at Numidium Prime were just a little south from here, it was easier to keep the illusion because the ship production system was well defended and wouldn't need extra defenses. Regardless, Depa piloted her Delta 7 starfighter towards the massive fleet. Malgus pressed all of his deckhands into focus firing on the Republic battle line. Master Balaba was simply here to lure Malgus away from the planet, which she had done successfully. Their fight hadn't become broadsides just yet, but Malgus didn't like long-range battles either, especially since the Republic started using Star Destroyers. In theory, it was easier for him to win a battle in close range compared to long range, because Republic battleships could outrange anything other than the Resurgent Mark II, which had just barely an edge on regular Star Destroyers, but he didn't command any of those. Malgus' fleet continued moving forward, closing in the gap between himself and his opponent. Depa spun her ship through wings of Sith pilots, all of them breaking off and engaging with whichever Republic starfighter they could. Clones and soldiers duked it out, while Depa tried to cut a lane open for the bombers, but they were still outnumbered. At this, she wondered where Admiral Coburn was. He promised a swift arrival, and to his defense, they were coming. They'd engaged a small task force at Ugre, which delayed them slightly, but it worked in their favor. While coming from Ithor was a starfighter route, thanks to a hyperspace lane, Coburn, similarly to Valen and Nihilus, would be arriving further away from the Sith fleet. At his arrival, the Sith were just about to close into full broadside range of Deppa's fleet, with cruisers trading blows right next to one another. But alas, Coburn had to ruin the fun. Malgus was devastated when he saw the Admiral's fleet arrive out of hyperspace. Massive Star Destroyers fired away, and Coburn, from the sanctuary of his bridge, gave out every command to his fleet. Starfighters were sent in to intercept Sith pilots as they tried to overrun Deppa Billaba. At the same time, full salvos were launched from the destroyers. Green and blue lasers filled the darkness of space and crushed into the sides of the Sith cruisers. Their shields nearly crumbled instantaneously. With not only the main destroyers unloading their firepower, but the multitude of Venators doing the same, not a ship on Malgus' flank would survive the counter. Luckily, he had a larger fleet, so he could stomach the losses, but to protect himself in theory, he moved his vessels in between Deppa's fleet, using the other Republic ships as protection for himself and his troops. At this, he started the boarding sequence, and he docked himself against what he thought was Deppa's flagship. His saber ignited, and his warriors followed him into battle inside a Venator. The assault would be remarkable. Clones and various civilian fighters assigned to Deppa's fleet, or honestly volunteered, would face the wrath of Malgus. He used the Force to crush windpipes in his weapon to dice people into pieces. His Sith troopers were pretty evenly matched with the clones, but they slaughtered the militiamen. Deppa, on the other hand, had to break back into the ship somehow, but she couldn't free herself from the dogfights that preoccupied her. Commander Cody and Commander Gray, though, quickly came up with their own counter-strategy to best utilize their own fleet. They might not have the ability to stop Malgus inside his ship or inside any other ship, but they were clone commanders, and they could make an attack on the other Sith vessels. So they loaded up into their LAATs and departed from their flagships for their own boarding sequences across various Sith ships. While Windu's attack on Hosnian Prime and the Separatist assault on Botor were going successfully, Master Quinlan Vos found himself and his troops on the surface of Circumdor. The direct route to Nal Hutta was completely exposed. With the battle raging over Kamino becoming a standstill and Void forces getting trapped by the surprise air fleet over Tapoka City, pirate scum stood no chance in space against Quinlan. On the surface was a much different story. Venators and acclimators provided air security from Void fighters, but pirates lined the streets. Like the battle for Palgo the Lesser at Tatooine, the real resistance came from the civilian population, which the Void used as human shields. If they could keep throwing people at the Republic, then eventually they might win. That wasn't really true, but it worked to a degree. Due to almost the entire city population of the capital and Circumdor protecting the Void leadership, they were able to prep escape vessels. They rushed from their thrones to the hangar bays, and waited until the fighters gave them a clearance to leave. Just outside the city gates, Quinlan and his men, on the surface, rushed through a dead forest. Commander Fey trailed behind his Jedi general, as they avoided artillery strikes, sending blasts of fire up into the air. The dead trees surrounding them were used as cover. The stumps, though, tripped many of the clones, leading to several more deaths. The terrain outside the city wasn't intentionally prepared for a siege, but it worked in the defense's favor. Quinlan provided enough cover for his men. Due to the dead look of the forest, the Emerald Saber drew a lot of focused fire. Behind the clones, their own artillery landed on the surface, and began unloading barrages at the Void camp. The walls were clobbered by massive shells, and launched civilian fighters from the ramparts. Just as it was with any real assault against the Void, these troopers realized their own foolishness in the midst of battle. The promise of a free galaxy ruled by the Hutts and championed by the people was never real. The lie of Jabba had led them into this position. Morale was low, but it soared in the initial minutes of the battle. Some warriors cheered when they watched a clone die here, or others got a boost of dopamine just firing their blasters there. But when the real battle became evident, when it became real for them, when the war was no longer a figurative, glorious crusade against a much more powerful force, their morale dropped. Friends, family members, co-workers died in their arms, or were just blown off the walls by shells of artillery. It never needed to be like this. The Republic always gave a chance for surrender, but it never came easily from the void. Quinlan got his men lined up in a protective line so they could fire onto the walls from below, and it worked perfectly. His weapon bobbed across his body, deflecting shots mostly into the walls, but into some opponents too. The clones around him, with Commander Fey giving them the go-ahead, slaughtered the Void Warriors. Inside the city, the fighters cleared the skies, enough for a leadership retreat. The shuttles ascended into the air and spat cannons on the Venator fire down, cutting through 2 of the 3 vessels and shattering the support of a building and dropping it too. Everyone on the walls of the defense force, and even those inside the cities, preparing their own defenses, were faced with true reality. The final shuttle broke through the fray and started to make its way for orbit, so it could escape. The Republic interceptors, though, had a different plan. They rushed through their individual dogfights, and 2 clone pilots spun around one another, firing their blasters through the clouds and smog of Circumdor. The shuttle used its own delicate evasive maneuvers, only for the final torpedoes, saved for this moment, launched right into its engines. The ship, just on the edge of the atmosphere, plummeted. The Void Warriors might not see the conclusion of the shuttle's crash, but they would feel the betrayal of their abandonment. Some of them would try and fight until the bitter end, but once the walls caved under the firepower of ATTEs, the battle was pretty much over. Quinlan and his men, after giving the walkers the order to provide covering fire on the wall, but not to target the city, rushed through the gaping hole. Master Voss led his men into an almost instant surrender. A few blasters were fired, a couple clones fell, but more than anything, the civilian soldiers paid the price. They lost more troops during the few-minute-long skirmish inside the wall. Just like Tatooine, the crucial void world of Circumdor had fallen. Alderaan, unlike many of the current battles in the galaxy, was a stalemate. After recovering from their crash inside the Separatist cruiser, Skywalker, Revan, and Ahsoka loaded up into a different shuttle, provided by the droids. Cthulhu had already given them the go-ahead when they were ready, but he was hyper-focused on Valkoran's attack group. The Sith Emperor had sensed the presence of Skywalker upon their arrival, having tried to get him killed. The attack on the Jedi Knight was very intentional. There was no other way missiles would have went straight for a random shuttle in the back of the Alliant fleet's lines. But it was a failed attack nonetheless. Skywalker was still alive and he was coming. After everything Valkoran had done, it was time for a Jedi to get his revenge. Oddly enough, Revan felt similarly. As Valkoran gave his orders out to the fleet, which kept up a heavy barrage on the Separatist warships, 2 fresh Resurgent-class dreadnoughts from Numidian Prime exited from hyperspace. This made their grand total 3. He added them to his battle line strategically, but he didn't focus all of his attention on the space battle. He knew better than to underestimate Anakin. He was a Jedi that would not stay dead or quiet, and because he had no intention of disrupting his own plans for galactic domination, Valkoran planned to sacrifice his student. It was about time she found her worth for him. The failure at Fondor, followed by the attack at Coruscant, put a sour taste in his mouth, and so, as he had with Revan and Malak all those years ago, he started a small alchemic ritual. On the other side of the battlefield, a wave of HMP gunships flipped out of their hangar bays and sped towards the Sith. As Cthulhu wanted, the aligned fleets prepared a barrage of fire that coated the space in between fleets in red, blue, and green lasers. The droid leader had dogfights at specific locations mapped out, and logged in a route for the strike team. Valkoran's flagship towered over the rest of his fleet. It took some fire, but Cthulhu knew how important it was to make sure the Sith Lord died today. These ancient warriors were slippery. The Jedi strike team would make sure it was dealt with. Joining the fighter squads would be the Jedi duo of Master Rapal and his knight ally. They sped between the tri-droids and fired away from their Delta 7s. Cthulhu stepped up to the viewport and watched the fighter attack speed down the middle of the line of the aligned fleet. They ripped through a few fighters and down the strait. He nodded his head and turned back to his crew, gesturing to the attack coordinates for a concentrated volley to open up protection for the fleet. With this command, he also redirected the focus of the shields to the starboard side, so the port side could release a heavier salvo. Behind the tri-fighters and vultures were the HMPs. Flak exploded around the attack group, but most of the gunships were left untouched as they broke through the battlefield. It was an intense journey for everyone. The Separatist shuttle weaved with the aid of R2 and Ahsoka. Revan paced the cockpit uneasily, watching the flagship get closer into range. The fighting got only more intense, with the Sith deploying counter-pilots to stop this attack. Valkorin wasn't at the helm of the ship during this assault, so he couldn't see it. His officers tried to stop it, but the tri-droids released several volleys of missiles, and they deployed buzz droids to stop the attack. The Vultures didn't follow the same move, because some of them straight up slammed into Sith fighters, kamikazing them out of the fight. The main bulk of HMPs continued without suffering many casualties. Once they got into range of the flagship, the last missiles on all the fighters fired, breaking a hole in the vessel and allowing the Separatist vessels to begin the landing procedure. Once the HMPs broke through a landing bay, they fired their turrets at the Sith guards who prepared to fire, but they were cut down by the squadron. Once the warriors were killed, the HMPs rolled completely around and deployed all their battle droids. The first wave were the B2s. Their wrist rockets unloaded, detonating a door and opening it up for the rest of the attack. More Sith troopers ran down the corridor, only to get slaughtered by the heavy lasers on the arms of the super droids. As the B2s dropped from the gunships, a squad of commando droids jumped into action, under the command of the singular droid leading this assault. It was a commando unit, and the droid individually fired its blaster straight down the line, doming 3 Sith soldiers and giving the next command to the rest of the unit. Lastly, the CIS shuttle arrived, with the Jedi rushing out to an already finished skirmish. Revan, Ahsoka, and Anakin all looked to one another with amused reactions. They thought that there would have been a little more fight from the Sith than that. With a grin, they all moved forward into the starship. Thanks to the B2s marching and creating a nearly impenetrable line of defense, the Jedi didn't have to do much fighting. The commando unit commanded this perfectly. Every time they came to a junction in the hallways, the commanders would break off and cover the sides of the formation. Anything on the rear would be taken out by either the Jedi or the few spare commandos. Of course, Valkorin wouldn't just leave his flagship without marauders or acolytes, so the sound of lightsabers igniting echoed through the corridors. The 3 Jedi rushed around the B2s to take the front of this. At this, the commando captain gave the command to stop pushing down the main hallway and to break off and search for the bridge. With the B2s laying down enough cover fire, the Jedi rushed in, Revan engaging 3 of these marauders, with Ahsoka and Anakin each taking on their own. While Skywalker and Operation Skyfall were pretty important to the Sith for a period of time, these combatants were actually more interested in bringing Revan's head to the Emperor. A traitor was much more valuable than a Jedi Knight. Weapons clashed away, with Revan slicing his saber through defenses and countering at every step he needed. Ahsoka and her attacker traded blows, but she saved her energy, allowing the Acolyte to put all of his cards out in front of her. Anakin on the other side of the hallways overpowered his opponent, shoving them into the wall and puncturing their chest with his saber. When he turned over, he speared his weapon through one of the Sith attacking Revan, before pulling it out with the Force and rushing the other. Revan countered his opponent, dropping his saber out of his hand and catching it in the other, slashing backwards and cutting them across the face. With another swing, they dropped lifelessly. Ahsoka, with the wall beside her, flipped over the Acolyte and sliced them across the back, down, before a B2 pummeled the individual with blaster fire. Anakin and Revan tag-teamed the final Marauder, killing them without much struggle at all. The Commando Captain and R2 met up with the 3 Jedi, explaining that they had a slight problem. They were sealed in this corridor. It wasn't the biggest deal because the hallway didn't lead to any ports, so the command deck couldn't jettison them out into space, but they were still trapped. The droid then snidely remarked that it really wouldn't affect them, only the 3 sentients of course. But if they wanted to get out, they needed someone to break through the ventilation shafts and into the control room just a few hallways down based on previous specs. Anakin and Revan turned to Ahsoka, and she turned around before realizing she was up for the challenge. With Ahsoka beginning her trek to free the entire droid attack force, and the battle over Alderaan getting more intense, there were some other problems for the Republic. Not only did Ludo Kresh arrive and clobber the Republic Defense Fleet at Dressel, but Nihilus and Valen had arrived on Iridu. They were already starting their strike on the hypervelocity cannon. Above, in space, Tulok Hord was directing his fleet into battle finally. The first turbo cannons were about to sound off. Down below, Nihilus trailed behind his shock troopers and Valen, who led the assault. Clones from their defense points fired down at the Sith, taking out the grunts but missing the Sith warriors. Despite the deaths of their troopers, Vaylin leapt up through the air and swung her saber down on a defense tower. She landed on the inside of it, swinging her saber around and killing every single clone that used her for target practice. With a burst of electricity, a trio flipped out of the other side of the tower, falling to their deaths. She swung her weapon around and killed the last of the clones. The hypervelocity cannon wasn't defended well from the surface. It was a massive weapon that jutted out of the ground, with some minor ramparts surrounding it. Truth is, no one expected the Sith to make the move they made. Even with the extra time following the battle at Darknell, they didn't anticipate a ground strike. Nihilus, who walked like a shadow between his soldiers, walked straight into the orbital cannon's corridors. Clones saw him, went for the kill by raising their blasters, but with the whip of his hand, their entire life forces were drained from their bodies. Around the facility, other Sithly warriors used various saber types to slaughter the rest of the clones. They were no match. Those who survived, or militiamen who gathered at the site of the invasion force, were shot dead by the invaders. Vaylin moved between turbo towers, wiping out entire crews, before joining up with Nihilus inside the main control room for the cannon. The moment she got behind Nihilus, she watched his power at work. He raised his hand and ripped souls from bodies. Due to the amount of the people in the room, it took a few extra seconds, but she examined everything he did, and once it was finished, asked for a chance to learn from him. The emotionless mask turned around and looked at her before nodding, and continuing with the attack. Just as the bodies hit the ground, dozens of Sith troopers entered. Nihilus pointed towards the seats without saying a word, and they quickly shuffled to the control consoles and prepared every heavy cannon for battle. Moments before they assumed full control over the orbital cannon, Lord Horde got into firing range and unloaded his first shot of the cosmic rust. The Golan platform Mark II started to crumble, and the attack fleet went on the offensive. Cannons fired away, and Tulak Horde withheld his fighter forces. He didn't want to use them until he came into range of the space station. Republic High Command was held within a circular station. It was a large rotunda that housed nearly 65,000 people, many of which key to maintaining operation for the Republic war effort. The station, while small, was equipped with dozens of heavy turbo cannons and weaponry. Due to the placement of everything in the Republic line, almost everything entered firing range at the same time. The station was the last to join the fight, but it was absolutely felt by the Sith the moment the station got in the firing range. Yet, just as Lord Horde had timed it and hoped it would work out, the Republic was almost instantly blindsided by an attack from the surface. The orbital cannon fired a blast straight into the rear hull of a Star Destroyer, caving in its entire system and forcing it to detonate by hitting the reactor. The explosion was at the heart of the Republic defense line, and due to the formation of the fleet, the Star Destroyer didn't have any of its rear shields activated. This, along with the cosmic rust rushing through the Golan 2 platform, made for a surprising chaos that filled the clone line. Officers inside the central space station rushed around the rotunda and called out for reinforcements. Admiral Trench, who was deep in Separatist territory, promised to send reinforcements from nearby worlds, but he could not guarantee their arrival. As these officers were trying to direct traffic back towards Iridu, they realized it would be impossible. The Void was being routed from over Camino, with their assault falling apart, despite heavily damaging the fleet. They wouldn't be able to offer Iridu any support, same with Gamor and Circumdor in hot space, plus they were so far away. Their only hope was holding the line. On the surface, the few scattered Republic outposts deployed what they could to stop the hypervelocity cannon from destroying their fleet. Another burst was fired, and instead of hitting the main contributors to the space battle, the blast smashed into the bottom of the space station. The shields held, but another clone operator called out that they were sustaining heavy damage from the blast. A couple corridors were damaged, and the breach had been made to the underbelly of the station, with reported casualties. Another deckhand across the room yelled out that the shields were knocked down to 70%. They wouldn't be able to take another couple blasts like that. They had to hope that the clones and militiamen on the surface could save them. Another cosmic rust blast hit the tip of a Star Destroyer. The main burst missed, but it was just enough to attach to the hull of the vessel. Damage started to creep across the ship as Lord Horde commanded his fleet to get closer. Heavy cannons on the Golan 2 platform ripped through cruisers and destroyers alike in the Sith attack. It was a heavy assault, especially with the Star Destroyers laying everything they had into the Sith. With light vehicles approaching the orbital cannons, the Sith Marauders that joined Nihilus and Valen deployed, rushing out and ripping through their lines. As Sith shock troopers fired down from the ramparts, killing anyone not cut to pieces by lightsaber. The hypervelocity cannon then unloaded another shell, smashing into the space station again. The Republic in space was acting out of desperation. They called forward 2 of their Star Destroyers for basically what amounted to a ramming maneuver. Just as the vessels pulled out of the fleet formation, one of them received damage from the already destroyed Golan platform, allowing the cosmic rust to find home on another vessel. The untouched destroyer powered everything into the engines and the forward shields as everyone but the captain and a few volunteers abandoned ship. Under the cover of the Republic fleet, this destroyer went almost entirely untouched as it slammed into the middle right of the Sith attack force. The explosion blinded Tulok's peripheral vision, but he didn't turn to face it. They were necessary sacrifices. He watched the bottom of the space station get hammered again by the hypervelocity cannon, his hand raised and every single fighter in the fleet deployed from their bays as the cosmic rust cannon loaded up again. The Republic fleet, which finally understood the potential damage the enemy flagship could do, focused fire on Tulok's vessel. The 2 closest Sith cruisers flipped their engines on and moved in front of the ship to protect its bridge. They didn't get into position immediately, but they used their shields to protect the Sith Lord's command ship. Without blocking the cosmic rust cannon, it was able to load up and send another burst into the last Golan platform. With several Star Destroyers falling apart, with one succumbing to cosmic rust, the Republic was in total chaos. Their ground forces, which were mostly civilian troopers, were trying to stop the orbital cannon from firing, and it was going terribly. Valen and Nihilus didn't even need to be involved. They watched from the command center as everything transpired. As for the defense in orbit, it was going terribly as well. Another destroyer, which was ravaged by cosmic rust, fell apart and sent more of its poison out into some of the nearby ships. It wouldn't be nearly as deadly as it would be for the vessel that just detonated, but like a disease, it would still spread. The second Golan 2 platform crumbled, and with the blast of the hypervelocity cannon, the hub of Republic High Command fell apart. The space station rotunda exploded into millions of pieces, killing everyone on board and sending a ripple shockwave outwards. Tulok Horde only pressed his assault more. This battle was over when he said it was. The end result would see the capital of Iridu besieged by Nihilus's flagship, the Ravager, true to his name, and most of the Republic fleet falling apart. The civilians that tried to shut down the orbital cannon failed, and due to the Ravager, the Republic heavy tanks never got into range to destroy it. The saving grace for Iridu would be the Separatist reinforcements, but even by that point it was too late. The Sith pulled back, having accomplished the fatal blow they were hoping to incur. It was no better than the fate of Malchus in the Northern Hemisphere. While he survived his boarding attack, the counters from Cody and Gray completely blindsided his fleet. 3 battleships fell under attack, with another group led by Waxer and Boyle going into the 3rd ship. These were powerful heavy hitters inside the fleet itself, and they fell to clone raids on the inside of them. Malgus was only one, and even though he had his marauders around the various vessels, Cody was just as lethal as some of them. Clones died during these attacks, but Admiral Coburn successfully broke in past Malgus's defense, and instead of being fearful that they might hurt Deppa's fleet, they boxed the Sith in and crushed them from almost all sides. The Venator that Malgus boarded would be targeted by the Republic, and he would almost die escaping into his own flagship. The barrage would continue until only a select few Sith vessels could escape from the Battle of Ord Mantell. The Sith Lord, Malgus that is, would retreat into hyperspace, heading straight for the shipyards at Numidian Prime. Over Alderaan, Ahsoka cut down against another Marauder, killing them and throwing them through the wall. She quickly opened up the corridors and freed the battle droids. She had been held back by a couple of different duels that had ensued. She basically got pinned down because someone cut her out of the ventilation shaft and she almost died, but just like her former friend Zala a few days before, she survived due to her scrappiness. While the B-2 battle droids could have used their wrist rockets to break everyone out, the commando captain didn't believe it was necessary to waste those resources, especially if they could use them for more important targets like a Sith Lord. It's pretty much the only reason why Skywalker agreed to letting Ahsoka go to the command room. As Master and Apprentice reunited, R2 tapped into the control module and informed the 3 Jedi where Valkorn's throne room was. Revan and Anakin looked to each other and nodded. telling Ahsoka to stay close to them and keep an eye out for Zala. As R2 probed the database, he found no sight of her inside of any prison system, because Valkorn didn't keep prisoners, at least not inside of his flagship. The captain told all the B2s to make a push down the central hallways towards the command bridge. Then, the droid informed Anakin that they would capture the main center and then use the ship to turn on the rest of the Sith fleet. As far as they could tell, the rest of the engagement with the Sith Empire was a stalemate. The Alderaanian Defense Force with Cthulhu was doing well, but the battle could still go either way. This was their chance to make sure they won. The captain just asked that they make sure they killed the Sith Emperor. The 3 Jedi all nodded and turned. As they did, Anakin told R2 to go and wait with the ship. The astromech listened and wheeled his way down with the B2s and towards the main hangar bay that they arrived in. All 3 of them had moments of doubt going forward. Everything that had transpired today would determine the fate of the Sith Clone War. If they didn't win now, they might never find a conclusion. There was a burden unlike ever before here. To Anakin, he recalled the feelings he felt when they captured the Star Forge. This was different. They had found a key to liberation, to changing the trajectory of the war. This was different. He could feel the weight of being the chosen one right here. As they rushed down the hall, they found the corridor to the throne room and opened it. The doors slid across the floor and into the wall, and they were presented with the Emperor in all of his greatness. A few words could be heard as he spoke to Zala, who knelt before him. Something about this being her moment for redemption. Her eyes were closed, but the bags of darkness were visible even from their distance. Anakin looked at Zala and felt her pain. He turned to Ahsoka, and he patted his hand downwards, as if to silently tell her to maintain her composure and remain calm. Ahsoka understood this. Valkorn stepped around his apprentice, who remained silent. He raised his hands in a welcoming manner. Finally, young Skywalker arrived, and he brought a friend. How generous. The Emperor could hardly look at Revan. He was so disgusted. How dare he believe that he could just waltz into this throne room? What a pathetic little rut. Valkorn prepared to give Skywalker a monologue, but Anakin stepped forward, raising a lightsaber hilt off of his belt and tossing it to Valkorn's feet. Skywalker told the Sith Emperor that it was a present from his son. He wasn't able to make it today for, other reasons, but it's what one might call a parting gift. The elder man looked down for a moment and analyzed it. He could feel his son's defeat just by looking at it, and a disappointed scowl covered his face. What a pity. His eyes turned up and his fingers snapped. Zala ripped her lightsaber out, and a blood-red crimson weapon illuminated her face, before her eyes were hidden in the glare. She rushed forward. The 3 Jedi moved into defensive positions, activating their weapons and stepping out of the way. Ahsoka got in front of her master and deflected Zala's strike as she tried to call her friend's name. Anakin and Revan moved in for Valkorn. Their sabers buzzed beside their bodies as they crept closer towards their silent opponent. Valkorn looked at Revan and told him that he could never avenge the past. Revan didn't budge, and so Valkorn tried his luck with Skywalker, telling him that his actions today wouldn't bring back the dead of yesterday. These 2 Jedi were not willing to break to his taunts, so he readied himself for their attacks. The Emperor preferred to maintain a quiet and calm composure, so when the Jedi moved in, his number one option was his defense. He weaved his hands around his body, defending himself and using the Force to throw their strikes into the ground and away. He kept an eye on his son's lightsaber, but maintained a seemingly weak position. The Emperor understood that Revan wouldn't doubt him, and while he would inform Anakin of Valkorn's powers, Skywalker might doubt his ally if the Emperor showed no signs of them. It would be a frustrating duel for the Jedi. Valkorn didn't budge from where he stood, aside from moving a leg or arm out of the way. The Sith Lord was impossible to land a hit on as he moved, dodging. Anakin and Revan swung in. Then the Emperor threw a shockwave at the floor, dispersing the 2 Jedi across the room. Once they landed, they moved in, trying a slower attack strategy. Unlike the 2 elder Jedi, Ahsoka and Zala traded blows. Their sabers rung out across the throne room, as Crimson and Emerald fought for dominance. Both of their fighting styles were scrappy, but for Zala, the one thing that kept eluding her was the similarities in their fighting styles. No matter how far apart they'd been, they were tied back to their basic training. Zala, though, with darkness coursing through her body, didn't give Ahsoka a chance to speak to her. She ripped her weapon down across her body and struck Ahsoka's blade. The Jedi Padawan spun around backwards, deflecting another strike, before her friend kicked her in the stomach and launched her from her feet. Ahsoka rolled across the ground and forced her saber above her head as Zala leapt through the air and slammed down. Their duel continued, with Ahsoka favoring a forward hold on her saber over the reverse one. As much as Ahsoka wanted to break through to her friend, she didn't have the time to catch her breath and tell Zala that she could still come back. It was lost on Ahsoka in this moment on whether or not Zala was really inside that body. Their weapons just continued to clash away, sending bright flares into their faces. Behind the Battle of the Apprentices, Revan and Anakin thrust their hands towards one another, and Valkorn in the middle raised both of his own hands, protecting himself. His feet moved out to the sides as he tried to stiffen his position, but even his boots started to slide across the ground. With a push of the Force, 2 bursts of electricity launched out of his fingertips and coated the floor, blasting Anakin from the feet up in a sizzling pain. Revan leapt off the ground and ignited his saber mid-air and swung across his body. Valkorn moved out of the way, using the Force to lob his opponent through the air and into the throne itself. Revan let out a painful gasp as he rolled onto the ground and searched for his saber. As Valkorn prepared to fire electricity into the fallen Sith, he heard Skywalker and turned around. Anakin's saber ignited once more inside of his metallic hand, and just as Valkorn saw it, he turned around, blasting the Force towards Anakin's hand. But instead of stopping Skywalker, the entire wrist fell off. Anakin used this to his advantage, as he planned on distracting the Sith Lord by loosening up his metallic wrist. He thrusted his fist into Valkorn's face and clocked him on the cheek before pulling Thexen's yellow saber into his hand and striking at the Emperor. Valkorn, already stumbling from the hit to his face, turned back to stop the attack with the Force. Anakin pressed down with all of his strength and used his stubbed forearm to apply more pressure on the top of his wrist. The Emperor held it up before releasing his grip and letting Anakin crash his saber into the ground, palming the Jedi's back and covering his body with electricity. Anakin smacked into the ground, dropping the saber. Valkorn pulled it into his hands and raised the weapon to stab Anakin through the back. Just as he did, he saw Revan coming towards him and raised the saber to defend himself, when from the other side of the room, a ceiling ornament slammed into his shoulder, lobbing Valkorn across the chamber and into the wall. The Sith Emperor slammed down and looked over with fury in his eyes. Revan helped Anakin back up and place his metallic hand back onto his wrist. Their weapons once again ignited, and they prepared for the duel with Valkorn to begin again. Just as they were about to move in, Zala rolled between them, forcing the Jedi to avoid her vicious strikes for their ankles. As they avoided, Ahsoka slammed down and was kicked backwards by Zala, who blocked the strike. The two of them re-engaged as the Jedi turned on the Emperor and slashed in. Valkorn rarely displayed his saber skills, but today he had no other choice. He stepped forward between his 2 Jedi opponents and they struck at him. His saber darted into their weapons, providing necessary parries and strikes to give him the opportunity to get into the defenses. Valkorn was a furious fighter, angrier with every passing minute, and he drove his blade at their limbs, hoping to rip one or multiple off. The battle meditation from earlier allowed Anakin and Revan to act almost like a dyad. They knew all of the others' moves before they were even made. Just imagine what they would have had if they had more time practicing together. Valkorn wasn't nearly as enthusiastic about their strikes. He batted each of them away, defending himself across his throne room. Even when he tried to pull objects from across the room to deter them, it did not work. Either Anakin or Revan would whip their bodies around and crush it, as the other protected them. The 2 Jedi didn't stop there, though. They experimented with using the Force against their opponent. One that nearly resulted in Valkorn's death was the 2 of them pulling the Force against one another and rushing past the Emperor, basically acting as a rope, and then pulling his legs out from under him. Valkorn didn't appreciate that too much. When they tried to capitalize on the moment, he gripped Skywalker and shoved him down towards the ground. With Anakin's hand behind his back on the floor and his saber over him, he protected himself. Revan then rushed in, slashing his weapon at Valkorn, who pulled away, firing electricity at Skywalker, who, ripping back with his own saber, caused another collision. As the duel between the 3 warriors seemed unending, the story of Padawans found conclusion. Ahsoka and Zala continued to trade blows, and in their lock, Ahsoka called out to her friend. She told Zala that she could come home, that her master had survived, that she could still find a place with the Jedi. She promised to help her. Zala's eyes flickered for a moment, as if the words had found their home. But in that moment of vulnerability, she took advantage of her Jedi opponent, ripping her saber down and destroying Ahsoka's lightsaber. She fell backwards, and Zala rolled her weapon in her hand, spinning it down towards Ahsoka, who pushed herself back at the last moment, eyeing her destroyed weapon, and the kyber crystal split in two beside her. She didn't have much time to react before Zala struck again. As Ahsoka rolled back across the floor, back up to her feet, she watched Zala strike and jab, the same way she always did during their training. And with her own agility, Ahsoka weaved around the saber and pulled it back around and shoved it straight through her friend's chest. There was a momentary pause as the air left Zala's lungs, and a shocked expression filled her face. Valkorin across the room pulled himself away from another few strikes and saw the crimson weapon sticking out of his apprentice's back. His fingers snapped. She had failed, and he returned to his engagement. Zala's breath hung in the air as she fell to her knees, and Ahsoka tossed the crimson saber away from her friend, noticing that something subtle had changed. She could see it in Zala's eyes. She fell backwards, almost pulling Ahsoka off of her feet as she did. She winced as the pain of her wound became more apparent to her, and she questioningly said Ahsoka's name. Wait, her friend was still alive? Tano nodded her head, not understanding why Zala had misunderstood their engagement. The fallen Jedi tried to understand what was happening. All she knew is she was fighting a blur. She told Ahsoka that something felt familiar upon their arrival, but she couldn't see her. Was it really her? Was she really alive? Zala's hand reached up and touched Ahsoka's face, and the painful realization of the truth fell upon her. As if the burden of death on a young soul couldn't be heavy enough, the lie that led to it was even heavier. Zala's shaky heart thumped away towards its final beat, and she grabbed Ahsoka's hand, trying to apologize. She didn't know the Jedi were still alive. She believed that they were all killed, that there was nothing worth fighting for but for redemption, that to stop the Republic was more than nothing. She believed, and to Ahsoka there was no need to apologize. Ahsoka always understood her friend, even when it was fully hard to grasp who she was or who she tried to be. Even when Zala turned to the darkness as a student, even when she abandoned Ahch-To, Ahsoka always tried to believe. The only difference here inside this throne room was that Valkorin made Zala's sight of her friends unrecognizable. All she thought is that she was fighting marauders dressed as Jedi. She couldn't see faces, nor really feel them. A tear slipped down Zala's cheek, and she turned her head to see her new master fighting for his life. The moment was unreal, because her dedication to the dark side had only ever taken from her. All those lives she murdered, that she willingly murdered, was for nothing. The secrets she gave up, nothing. Zala gripped her friend's hand tighter, and Ahsoka grasped the hand with both of her own, promising Zala that it would be okay. She didn't have the words. How could she? They were both so young. Both were traumatized by a war that would leave no soul untouched. Ahsoka tried to be strong in seeing the realization of the lie that Valkorin had shrouded her friend in. Ahsoka couldn't help but feel guilt and pity and pain. Zala was meant to be so much more, and despite her attempts to hold back tears, they welted over, and Ahsoka held her friend until Zala, with nothing but an apology on her lips, gave her last breath. Her body fell limp, and her hand stopped applying pressure to Ahsoka's hand. Ahsoka couldn't let go. Even if her friend had hurt others, she believed that Zala deserved a better fate. Ahsoka held that hand, until the reality of the situation returned to her, and the war for the galaxy became the same frightening fate that befell her friend as she died. Anakin and Revan weren't aware of Zala's death, nor Ahsoka's grief, but their sabers continued to crash away. Valkorin was disappointed that Zala couldn't do more in this battle against the Padawan. He shoved his son's saber down into the ground, blasting sparks outwards into Revan's mask, and Skywalker deflected a counter with his metallic hand, and just as he prepared to push back against his opponent, he channeled a sense of serenity. He may have not seen or known about the death of Zala, but in it, he found peace. She may have passed on after playing the part as a servant of evil, but there was resolution. Skywalker focused forward, his and Valkorin's sabers locked and pushed against one another. The Emperor raised his hand, preparing to blast Anakin with electricity, and before he could release it, Anakin raised his human hand to meet it. In one moment, as Revan scrambled to his feet, the entire room was blinded in the mixing of light. Valkorin sent Sith blue and white Force lightning at his young Jedi opponent, and Skywalker released a wave of golden Force judgment. The blasts combined and pushed against one another. The Emperor couldn't stomach it when he saw it. What terrified the Sith Lord was how he was unable to stop the light once it started. As if a new force had awoken within Skywalker, he became harmonized and transcended in this moment. The burst of golden light launched Valkorin off of his feet and into the rafters, where he would fall to the ground in a collision that indented the floor. Anakin rolled his weapon into his standard form and moved in, with Revan following right behind him. Their sabers slashed down as Valkorin swept upwards, missing a parry here and another there. Anakin ripped his weapon across Valkorin's face, and he tumbled down the stairs to the lower level, where he got back to his feet and ascended with fury. That did him so much as Revan continued to press him, with Anakin assisting where he could. Valkorin and the two Jedi spread out and readied themselves for the final stand. As they did though, the vessel rocked. It was coming under heavy fire from the supporting fleet. The B-2s made it to the bridge and had been firing on the Sith, and they had gotten tired of it. Revan made the first move, striking in, with Skywalker behind. The two collided, and Anakin ripped through Valkorin's forearm, giving Revan the chance to slice his opponent across the shoulder. The Emperor stumbled and nearly fell to the ground, but with all of his strength he lifted Anakin and Revan off the ground with the Force. Ahsoka, seeing this, through her tears, pulled Zala's lightsaber with the Force and rushed up behind the Emperor, igniting the weapon straight through his back and out the left side of his abdomen. The Sith Lord stumbled and heaved. Anakin and Revan dropped, as Valkorin turned back, gripping his saber and telling Ahsoka that if she were taller, she could have taken his head as a trophy. He shoved his saber down towards her chest, and as he did, Revan with all of his strength pulled back with the Force, and Anakin sliced across the Sith Emperor's neck and he fell to the ground, rolling helplessly, gripping it with all of his strength to stop himself from dying. Ahsoka fell back with wide eyes, and Anakin stood between her and the Emperor. Just as Revan prepared the final blow, the ship rocked to the side, lobbing everyone across the room. Valkorin was able to use this diversion to break away from the Jedi, with his hand over his throat and a limp into an escape pod that was inside of his throne that shot him out of the vessel. Inside the pod he fell over, leaving the pod to be intercepted by the Sith Empire as it began its retreat from Alderaan. The damage done to the flagship was already finished, but it still stood, and with the Separatist fleet bearing down on the rest of the Sith, with the help of Cthulhu's leadership, the second battle of Alderaan was appearing to be a rout. Ahsoka quickly grabbed the pieces of her kyber crystal and pocketed them, while putting Zala's lightsaber on her belt, as she gave her friend a last goodbye and followed her master. The battle droids inside the ship were pretty much already leaving, and R2 was impatiently waiting for the Jedi to arrive. When they entered the ramp, the astromech pulled out of the fiery vessel and into the cover of the Separatist fleet, now finishing off the stragglers of the Emperor's fleet. Once out into the open, Revan would take the helm and pilot the ship back towards the Republic Star Destroyer, where they'd be able to take their moment for a breather and discuss with Ahsoka what had happened to Zala, and speak with Cthulhu about the various battles across the galaxy. Not far from Alderaan, to the north, on the planet of Dathomir, Lord Plagueis smiled. He turned towards the other three, referring to them as the Sith Quadumvirate, that the time was upon them. The blue fires inside his cave blew out, as the fire in his own eyes slowly faded. The chamber became dark, and he walked from the cave. Bastila looked to Crate. Their fate with the Sith Lord had yet to be decided. The truth of the great lie about to be revealed, and Maul, loyal to only one Sith in the entire galaxy, prepared for his reckoning. As the Quadumvirate exited the cave, they were greeted by Mother Talzin, and Plagueis smiled, thanking her for everything she had given him. She nodded her head with a grin. The work of the Night Sisters had liberated him. Now it was his turn to repay the favor by leaving. Plagueis bowed to the mother of the clan and started off towards the shuttle, with the three other Sith he now had by his side, trailing behind him. No one spoke a word. All followed closely behind and departed from the system, as Plagueis seemed to recognize that his moment to rise was here. Back on Tir Nanog, Opa Rancisis listened to a status report from Republic officers. Without high command, there was no one to collect all the information. The battle at Iridu was a definitive loss. but there had been so much ground gained today. Aside from the Battle of Dressel being a complete failure, and Ludo Kresh getting stopped in Bothan space, the Republic had some major successes. Quinlan Vos established a foothold that could see the end of the Void, with the short jump between Circumdor and Nal Hutta now at their disposal. General Akbar had success at Obadiah, after eventually cracking their fleet, and now the Rhydonium gathered by the Pikes could be accessed by the Republic and Separatist allies across the entire Eastern Hemisphere. In the core, Hosnian Prime, Botar, and Alderaan were all decisive victories, with Fondor being the key to establishing a foothold for the Alliant force in that sector of the galaxy. Master Balaba was unsure if she and Admiral Coburn would use Ord Mantell as a staging grounds or not, but early reports from Commander Cody suggested that there were millions of civilians looking for a chance to take a fight to the Sith Empire. Oppo was about to read the newly released report from Alderaan. It was about the Emperor and the fate of General Skywalker. He eagerly prepared to turn on the communication when loud footsteps approached. Master Rensesis turned around with concern on his face, but it was Sola Gray. Her face wore triumph and happiness, but she had to take a breath for herself. Oppo asked his child if she was alright, and Sola nodded her head. She explained that she'd woken up. The Tabre survived. The medical droids were clearing her right now. She was healthy again. Oppo's own face lit up, and he thanked Sola for the news. The moonlight over Tir na Nog lit up the ground, and the two of them moved over to greet Natabre after all this time. And that, my friends, is the finale to Season 4 of the Sith Clone Wars. Special thanks to all of you guys for making this series happen. I'm very proud of this season. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I think this is the longest season of the Clone Wars just by length of episode, but this was a really fun season for me to write, and I hope you guys had an equally as fun time with it. I do have to tell you guys, I have the entire outline for Season 5 finished right now. So I'm going to be working on that for the time being, and I've got some other mini-series coming out for you guys, but just so you are aware, Sith Clone Wars Season 5 is officially official. It is announced, it'll be coming, it'll be written, and I'm excited for you guys to see it. This season specifically, I do want to make a couple notes. This season is ironically something I've been planning for a long time. The whole thing with Zala was something that was set up, I think, in Season 2. And she was always meant to be like the antithesis to Maul. She's kind of like this constant light side version of Sisyphus. Obviously she falls to the dark side, but this season wasn't her season per se, but it was the extension of her arc, and how her arc is, honestly, she's gonna haunt the narrative is what I'm kind of saying. Is her arc in Season 2 is designed to haunt the narrative. She's not the main player. She definitely has a larger role in this season, which is why she's featured so prominently on the poster, but her arc is haunting the narrative. That's her. She's Sisyphus because that's what she experiences, but she is meant to haunt the narrative in many ways, and that was always her place from the beginning, and it was always layered in there. And I think when I released the full movie of the Sith Clone Wars, I mean all 5 seasons plus if there's more combined, you'll see that arc a little bit easier as it's just in one full movie. But that from her is really why her presence has been so pronounced in this season, and why I was really excited for her arc to be finalized, because her haunting the narrative definitely still applies outside of her just being alive. As for like Anakin and Ahsoka, you know, I thought that there's something that works really well in Last Jedi that I like, and it's separating Rey and Finn. I think it's just something the characters needed, because those characters were like inextricably connected, and Finn couldn't get over that. And so that's what Anakin needed in this season. I thought that taking Anakin away from Natabre was very necessary for building his character up, and kind of showing how much of character growth he had. Because he's no longer relying on the dark side. As you see here at the finale, he's using electric judgment, which is something only one other Jedi is known to have used, which is Plo. You know, he's using skills and abilities that, you know, he is not reaching in the regular Clone War timeline, right? He's advancing far beyond his years. And so he's reaching this pinnacle of light that he's never experienced in his life, and that's why he's able to use Force Judgment, and why he's able to literally almost kill Valkorin in a duel. You know, all of this is for a reason. So I hope you guys are enjoying so far, as I've done since the beginning of the Sith Clone Wars, especially with Season 2 going forward. Everything is going to tie off at some point. I promise you, if there's a cliffhanger, don't worry. It's all planned into the story, okay? Trust. So, I hope you all enjoyed Season 4 of the Sith Clone Wars. I love you all so much. Thank you all for supporting this mini-series. It's not even a mini-series at this point. It's like 25 hours of content. So, anyways, I love you all so much. Spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.